So hello again. Hope everyone's doing well. So just to go over a little bit about the last video, something I did fail to mention, and I apologize. This class will be focusing on the perspective of the white-black dynamics or paradigm from the perspective of Tim Wise. Tim Wise is a critically acclaimed speaker, author, does a lot of good stuff. He's a white male, actually, who talks about a lot of the issues that either our policies have, some of the issues concerning race and the origin of it, as well as some of the like real practical instances of privilege of white people. Specifically, he does talk a lot more about white males, but he does talk about the black-white paradigm in general, but more so he's speaking from the perspective of a white male. And so it's really interesting to hear his perspective because, as I said, I think he says a lot of good stuff. But and even something we're going to talk about a little bit later. But hearing it from him it gives a different. I want to say something, but I'm trying to think of a way to say it without giving away what I'm going to speak about a little bit for next week. But we'll skip past that. So for this week, we looked at the video with Tim Wise, and he's talking about the creation of whiteness. And it's really interesting, right? To me, I think this video provides a lot of background for a lot of different things, right? A little bit because we're talking about the shaping of the country, and specifically talk about how the idea of like being white or the category of white was created. And I think when I first heard this video, I was like, wow, honestly, no, let me be honest. When I first heard the video, I was like, I have no idea like why this is important. Um, but what's really interesting about it, right, is the fact that we do see that, as he said, like more than what the history books actually talk about, there was a bond between black and or African and white servants, right? Where they are the poor, they're the majority of the population over there. They have a lot more in common because, as the way he said, like the elites were cleaning their clocks, right? And so what he meant by that was that they pretty much were all the policies and stuff. It really supported the elite. They had all the wealth, they had all the opportunities, all of whatsoever you want to say. The elite were able to access those things, and the poor class were not. And it was really just strictly on the class level. Race was not important because, as he said before, there were issues of like white on white wars and racial issues, or not even racial, ethnic issues in that, right? And so for him to talk about the creation of the white race, it's really interesting because, as we see, it was, in a sense, he said something that I think is still true today, right? We said back then, in that time, they were a people of leisure. And so the whole idea was that how do I get through life without doing as much as possible? Um, and that's still a very similar idea where it's like, how can I make my life as comfortable as I would like? How can I get as much opportunity, as much resources, as much whatever that may be for myself? And it's a very selfish thinking. And so I kind of argue actually that we still are in this, well, of course, the same mindset, which allows for the same inequalities because with that thinking behind it, there's going to have to be someone on the bottom, right? If I'm the one who's going to be at leisure, everyone can't be at leisure because there got to be someone who's going to be in the fields picking up crops and cotton or whatever that may be, cleaning bathrooms in modern day world. And I say these things, right, not in an offensive way because that is really hardworking stuff. But there's an emphasis that, or not emphasis, the word I'm looking for is that there is respect put socially, right, on jobs where you don't do those things. Where me, someone who's worked different jobs like that, not necessarily like sharecropping or farming, but with cleaning and things of that nature, I think that those things are a lot tougher, right? And I think they should be paid a lot more. But where we see that our society, we value jobs and places and markets of like of leisure, and doing easier things as far as physically, not necessarily mentally. We do, just like I said, place a value on that. And so, getting back to what Tim Wise is talking about, right? The creation of that, where you have these elite people who are people of leisure. They see that their population or their sharecroppers or their indentured servants are bonding together and deciding that, hey, you know what, this is going on long enough. We're going to revolt, right? And that's the mixture of black and white people. So how, as the elite, can we then figure out a way to like dismantle this fire and this fuel? And so they create the white race by, as he said, like giving them different things as far as land, different advantages as far as like being able to be a witness and testify in court, and all these different privileges that black people or African people didn't have at that time. And so he's in this white or creation of the white race. There's a giving of different advantages that still put these newly inducted members at a lower rate, a lower standard than the elite class. However, they're still above the African community, right? And so there is a sense of more power and more sense of authority in that. And even some of the readings talk about, because it was specifically around slavery time, right, where we're talking about how you create this dynamic of hatred towards the African community. And so you give this once very close group of people, the poor class, we're all close, we're all together, we don't like the elite. After the white part of that poor class start to, what's the word I'm looking for? I can think of the word. I think it's, but anyway, they start talking with the elite class, right? What the elite class started to do was that they said, hey, you know what? We'll give you all positions of authority over these the African people, right, or over the slaves. So you could be the overseers, and you can be people who can then tell us if we have a runaway slave, we'll give you money. So there's an incentive. And as I said, right, we're already living in a selfish society, and any way that I can get a leg up, I will do it. And so this once close group is then destroyed and dismantled, because not only do I give this new white group or white members a little bit more power, but I also then give them another reason to further distance themselves from the African community, the community that they were once close with. And even in that sense, right, we see the creation of hatred or some type of disdain towards the African community from the white community, even people who do not hold high political and economical power. And so even when we're talking about white privilege, what is something that's going to be really interesting, and even Tim Wise talks about that in his other video, white privilege does not necessarily mean just money or political power or anything of that sense. And now, don't get me wrong, it encompasses those things, but there's also a psychological effect or power that's associated with it. Like one of the videos, we don't watch it in this course, but Tim Wise talks about even him being a white male from a poor background. In the classroom, he was always told that he was smart and he was capable. And it's as small as that may seem, a lot of the black students, especially the research that I've done and I've looked at, and we were talking about black students and their interactions with the professors or the teachers, that's not the same things that they are hearing. And so when Tim Wise would mess up in class, he was told to try harder and to do a little bit better, and that he was capable. However, when there's a black student who's doing the same thing, who's not doing so well in class, these teachers think that this is predictive of their performance later on in years, and so they track them to lower track classes and stuff. And I'm getting a little bit off topic, but trying to talk about things in a general sense and give you all like a little bit more background information. So we see the creation, going back to it, right? We see the creation of some type of disdain towards the African community. And this thing is sustained even from slavery all the way even till now, right? And it may not be as blatant. In instances, it is as blatant. But when you see there are ways where we have, Tim hit it on the head, right? Where there's a lot of, just numerically, of white poor class people. And there is a lot of, or the large majority percentage of the black community is actually in some type of poverty state. Now, it may not be like completely like we can't afford X, Y, and Z things, or it may not even be paycheck to paycheck, but there is some type of financial stress. And then we're talking about percentages, not necessarily numbers, but percentages for the black community. And so when you see that there's a lot more commonality amongst these two groups, the question would be, well, why not join together and then address these issues? And as Tim Wise was talking about, you create this issue from way, way, way back when we're talking about creating racial classes. And then if we create this hatred or disdain back then, this will sustain for later years. And we'll even talk a little bit more about it with the Lynch letter concerning how do you psychologically, how these issues and how these things like as far as disdainment towards another group sustains and even creates some type of psychological disadvantage for the group that is being targeted. So most specifically the black community. And so the beginning of these certain dynamics is really interesting because at the end of the day, I think that it does show you that there are historical roots of the current mindset and framework that some problematic people, like just like I said, like Bill O'Reilly, this is the root of it. And so what I really want you all to get from it was the idea of that we have the creation of disdain or hatred from white elite people towards the black community or African community, and how, if you think about it, these elite people and even the white people who were brought in as new members, they have a lot of, well, they're not a lot, they have all of the political, economical, what's the other word I'm looking for, social, all these different powers, because they have all the resources, they have all the money, they have all the land, and so they create these different agencies and laws and policies that continues to keep the African community down. And as Tim Wise said, even when we were talking about issues of the flooding, you see that there was a lot more commonality amongst the black and the white communities because they both were destroyed by the flooding, right? And the elite class didn't even care. So there's more concern with their money, but getting back down to the basic level of the two poor classes in it, black and white, the reason why, instead of joining together, the reason why the white community decided to say they would blame the black community, and even, well, let me talk about that in a second, but they would blame the black community for their problems and not blame the elite, is because of these historical roots that were way back when in creating the white race, right? And so it's really interesting when we talk about, or when Tim Wise started talking about the reason why, even in the first town hall, the poor white class that was greatly hurt just as much as the black community by the flood, they said, hey, you know what, we know all our people are left, so let's create a law that says that you can't own or buy land here unless you are a blood relative of someone who lived here, right? Which inherently means that someone who's white, because the community was 95% white. So there's only 5% chance that you could be someone of color who can live into this community, right? Or buy land in this community. And so Tim Wise is saying that, hey, you know what, like, this isn't something that's like brand new, right? And this is actually very indicative of even the mindset and culture of America currently, where there are people who think as if because you're a different race, you do not deserve the same opportunities, or there's something wrong with you. You're the problem. And those things were, again, rooted way back in historical events. And so what I beg you all to think about is the idea of, like, if you can, since racism and all these things are not new, when you think about the historical roots of this country, and being completely honest, if you know that there is a group, right, white people, for the most part, I'm not well, excuse me, white people, not all white people are racist or anything like that. I'm not saying that. When you have a class or group of white people who started pretty much the culture and the politics and the systems, all the things that we call now America, right, or the United States of America, and you know if they have some type of disdain towards the community, these things, their thinking becomes systematic. That's what we talk about systematic oppression, because they think of ways to legally implement policies and plans and ideas that will continue to keep this group down, keep the black community down. And so when we're thinking about, well, the question I want to ask you all is, considering these things, how do you think that it has played a role in the current state that I call the result, right, of the black community currently? We think about hundreds of years of systematic oppression and systematic injustices done to black community, or even black and brown communities as a whole. When these policies and unjust systems are sustained, even though a few of them have been broken down, right? But when they're sustained, how does that then play out into what we now see as the black community? So hopefully this has been a pretty good tutorial. Again, I just want you all to watch this video to get a little bit of the background, understand the creation of whiteness, and really understanding the dynamics of the black-white relationships and paradigms and where those things stem from. So hope you all have a great evening, and thank you.